Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, the SSC Khartoum leadership accused the separatist Somaliland authorities of killing POWs, where Hargeisa has denied all allegations, with the Somaliland Human Rights Commission visiting POWs in Hargeisa prisons, confirming humane treatment. This comes after footage surfaced online of alleged torture of POWs. Also on the program, Ethiopia attempts to mediate the conflict in Las Anod as it calls on warring sides to come to attend a face-to-face peace talk in Addis Ababa, but neither party attends. Why is the question? This is topics on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program and where you can find other exclusive programs such as the African Weekly Roundup and Maha Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the news. The conflict in Las Anod continues to rage on as the world continues to ignore the worsening political dispute, which seems to have no expiry date. While the direct battles have begun to slow down with limited to no reports of direct heavy exchanges of gunfire and artillery in the city on Tuesday, it seems as though the political deadlock is not moving forward or backwards at all. Somaliland separatist forces have failed to capture the city, and SSC Khartoum forces have not successfully managed to push opposing forces of Somaliland out of Seoul. Politically, Somaliland continues to insist that their borders are based on those drawn by British colonial authorities following their invasion of northern Somali territory during the late 1890s, advocating for secessionism from the Somali nation. Conversely, SSC Khartoum's leadership have insisted that they do not support any form of secessionism from the Somali nation, instead calling on the federal government of Somalia to recognize the region as a federal member state, or a FMS, of the Federal Republic. Now, while the deadlock remains tight, there has been interesting developments in the conflict as it moves from a localized conflict within Somalia to one with regional involvement. Earlier this month, a delegation from the Ethiopian federal government visited Hargeisa and held talks with the Bihi regime before flying to Gerowe to hold talks with leaders of the 33-member council that govern the SSC region. An agreement was understood to be reached, but that both sides would stop the fighting immediately before talks can actually begin. Now, speaking to the media, spokesman for the 33-member council, Abdurrazzaq Mohammed Hassan Falalug, said that if the ceasefire were to come into effect, dialogue could be much easier to ensure accountability. Now, on the other side, Somaliland authorities remain quiet about the Ethiopian delegation visit and what was discussed in Hargeisa. Fast forward to last week, the shelling of the city began again despite days of relative stability and quiet. Civilians have returned to the city in dozens due to the false sense of hope that the conflict may have drawn to a close as a result of talks with Ethiopian delegations in Hargeisa and Gerowe were actually awoken to sounds of artillery barrages that destroyed homes and other private as well as public property in the city. Now, both sides accuse one another. However, the spokesman for the SSC Khartoum leadership conveyed that the violence continues as a result of Somaliland's siege of the city. He points out a couple of points. One, he points out roads continue to be blocked by Somaliland forces, preventing the movement of the SSC leadership. Number two, he points out the water supply in the city continues to be limited, with supplies arriving from neighboring the Howd region. And number three, he highlights medical supplies are struggling to arrive to the city due to the blockade, with severely injured casualties being forced to travel via dangerous routes to reach safety in neighboring Puntland state before being flown to Mogadishu for further medical treatment. More recently, Ethiopian officials called both Hargeisa and Las Anod leaders to come to Addis Ababa to participate in face-to-face talks in an attempt to defuse and end the conflict. While the Somaliland side has not directly addressed this, speaking during an event in Hargeisa, Somaliland leader Musa Bihi stated his number one priority was to reach a ceasefire in Seoul and also welcomed any party that is willing to mediate the conflict and find a solution to the political and military impasse in the region, therefore hinting that the Bihi regime is open to attend Addis Ababa for talks with the SSC leadership to find an solution to the impasse. Additionally, a spokesman for the Somaliland Traditional Elders Committee have also advocated for traditional elders from the region also to participate in the expected talks in Ethiopia. Now, conversely, the 33-member council in Seoul directly addressed rumors that the Ethiopians were taking an active role in ending the conflict in northern Somalia, stating that they will not participate in any talks in Ethiopia until Somaliland ends continued bombardment of the city and withdraws its forces from the region. Now, speaking to the press, Grad Abdessalan Hassan Mohammed stated that the SSC committee was not rejecting any peace talks. He said that the leadership was grateful to Ethiopia that wanted to resolve this conflict. However, he highlighted that the environment was not right with the constant artillery bombardments and a road blockage. Ethiopians know that the bombings are ongoing, he said. Now, remaining in the regional involvement, Djibouti government led by strongman Ismail Omar Guelleh has also been accused of being involved in the conflict, with some accusing the neighbouring country of providing both logistical and military support to the separatist Somaliland regime led by Musa Bihi, although this was denied by the Djiboutian finance minister and spokesman for the ruling RRP party, Ilyas Musa, last month. Now, reports initially indicated that weapons were being transported between the regions, while officials from Hargeisa and Djibouti were accused of meeting in secret and plotting. Now, these, of course, have been all denied by the Djiboutian government and the Somaliland Authority in Hargeisa. Now, the main question becomes, what role is Djibouti playing in this conflict? We understand that the president of Somalia, the leader of the separatist Somaliland region, Musa Bihi, as well as Djibouti president Ismail Omar Guelleh, met in Djibouti last year to celebrate a marriage of former Benadi police chief Sadiq John and the first daughter of Djibouti. So if Djibouti denies supporting Somaliland, why is it not taking any active role to actually end the conflict? Firstly, these are fellow Somalis. Number two, it's a neighbouring region. What interest does Djibouti have in the conflict continuing? Is it due to the vested business and clan interests that the Djibouti leadership has with the Somaliland leadership under Musa Bihi? That is a question for analysts and critics to understand. Now, what broke the ceasefire initially observed by both sides following talks? Of course, we understand that the conflict slowed down, and at some point, there was no gunfire between both sides during attempts by Ethiopia to mitigate the conflict. Now, last week, Saturday, an 8-hour battle took place in Las Anod, in which 30 people were killed and a further 60 were injured, according to the SSC Khatima leadership, after Somaliland forces launched a dawn raid on the city from 4 sides. Dozens of others were injured, who were transported to Getaway Mogadishu for further medical treatment, and this comes after an attack launched by SSC Khatima forces to push separatists further away on Friday, which was repelled by Somaliland forces. One needs to understand that while both sides accuse the other of attacks, there is an interesting dynamic at play in Las Anod, with one side attempting to push Somaliland forces out of Seoul, whereas Somaliland forces are attempting to push their way into Las Anod. So there's going to be periods of times where the leadership of Las Anod attempt to push Somaliland forces away, and here we saw that on Friday, which failed, and the following morning a counterattack was launched by Somaliland forces, which also failed. Now, Somaliland alleged that Puntland-led allied forces, and I quote this, were instigating the violence. However, the SSC leaders denied this claim and stated the Puntland administration was not actively participating in the conflict. Now, both sides have claimed to have taken prisoners, vehicles, and weapons. However, the SSC Khatim leadership has accused the Somaliland regime of killing prisoners of war. Spokesman Abdurrazzaq Mohammed Hassan Falaluk accused Somaliland forces of openly shooting POWs, which breaks international law and, more specifically, the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. Furthermore, images circulated online showcasing a document alleged to be from a court in Hargeisa, sentencing 9 men to death for their involvement in the ongoing conflict in Las Anod, utilizing a law initially passed during the Barre era, which was prior to 1991. However, this has not been confirmed, and Somaliland authorities have not directly addressed these allegations, whereas a video surfacing online just today, where media outlets visited prisoners of war held in Bur'a in Togder, alleged that there was no trial ongoing. On the other hand, Somaliland's Human Rights Commission stated the prisoners captured during the war in Seoul were being treated humanely and in accordance with the Geneva Convention. A spokesman for the commission, Addis Saad Hassan, confirmed that the commission visited the main prison in Hargeisa, stating that they witnessed no violence or injuries to prisoners of war. Additionally, as I've stated before, local media organizations visited prisoners that were being held in Togder region, which borders Seoul. Individuals that were captured by Somaliland forces from the SSC region spoke to the press, stating that they allegedly did not receive any form of torture or abuse from Somaliland forces, instead stating that they were with their clansmen and were being treated fairly. This is despite videos emerging online showcasing alleged torture. Now, the POWs alleged that rumours circulating around were simply fake news. However, some have criticised the footage as showcasing possible soldiers under duress and fearful for their lives. So now the main question comes back to, has the separatist Somaliland Authority committed human rights violations? Now, the Rome Statute of the International Court, Criminal Court that is, the treaty establishing the International Criminal Court, laid out a definition of war crimes. And if we look at Article 8 of the statute, it states the following, that willful killing, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, extensive destruction and appropriation of property, not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and unwantonly, and intentionally directing attacks against civilian population as such or against individual civilians not partaking in hostilities. Now, according to the above statute I've just read, Somaliland could be liable for possible war crimes. Indeed, Somaliland is the authority in the northern Somali region and has taken responsibility to provide security to the Sool region. As this authority, Hargeisa initially killed civilians during protests as a result of the indiscriminate and amassing assassinations of leaders in the city that has been ongoing since 2009. Now, following multiple killings and physical resistance from the locals, the authority in Hargeisa abused its power to bomb and try and overrun the city using military force. Now, if we go back to the statement, if we go back to Article 8 of the statute, it states that any willful killing, any willful suffering, or any destruction of or appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully. Now, was there a military necessity for Somaliland to artillery barrage an entire city based on the fact that people were protesting against what was going on in the city? I think that's not justified at all. Now, Somaliland has accused the region of harboring terrorists, even though the region has been under Somaliland control since 2007. It's surprising Somaliland has not been aware of any terrorists in the region up until the locals decided that they had enough of the continued assassinations in the city that remained unsolved. Now, despite attempts to claim the involvement of the federal government and neighbouring federal member state of Puntland, it is evident that the Bihi regime is actually fighting local non-military combatants. There's combatants, there's fighters, but they're non-military. Although recent clan tensions have escalated the conflict to one of clan allegiances as much as political, and this is not being denied, the fact that there's involvement of clans from other regions in Somalia and even in the Held region, this is not being denied. These are involved in the conflict as much as any other, but these are not military combatants. These are not forces of a government or a military. These are simply civilians, or what Somalis call Ma'awislay. These are clansmen supporting their fellow clansmen. It has been confirmed, however, that Somaliland forces targeted civilian infrastructure, hospitals, public offices. For example, the Doctors Without Borders representative for Somalia confirmed that the main hospital supported by the charity in Las Anod was bombed in February. The UN confirmed over 200,000 people have been displaced, with local figures indicating over 200 deaths and more than 500 people being wounded. And these are predominantly civilians, women and children, and men who are fighting this war. There's been images all over social media showcasing properties destroyed, homes destroyed, schools destroyed, and it's possible. And all of this and could amount to war crimes at the International Criminal Court. Now, this is the main question for everyone, and I think a lot of people want the answer to this. Is it finally time for the Bihi regime to be held accountable? Is it finally time for the international community to come together and condemn the clear violence that is ongoing in Las Anod, where civilians are being killed? The reality is that Africa as a continent remains second tier to the rest of the world issues. We know what's going on in Ukraine. We know what's going on in talks in the Middle East. All these different things happening across the world. Africa seems to be on the back burner, and it seems to be a forgotten continent because nobody clearly cares about civilians being killed in Central Africa Republic, in the Congo, in Mali, in Somalia, in all these different regions. The world continues to ignore. Finally, back to Somalia. Many are asking where the federal government, led by Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, even is. A committee comprising of MPs and senators from the region of Sool, led by Deputy Speaker of the Upper House, Tim Addis, visited the city in a symbolic move. This is the first time in years federal MPs and leaders visited the city as a committee, so openly as it previously was under the control of separatists. However, while symbolic, it does not provide any solution to the impasse. In the NCC summit, or the National Consultative Council summit last week, federal leaders, excluding Puntland's Denny, took a neutral position on the matter, with the NCC calling for peace and dialogue while condemning any aggressor, according to the communique released by the committee. Now, many have criticised the federal leadership for taking no part in the peace process in Las Anod, many have highlighted the president's frequent trips and busy schedule as a neglect of his constitutional duties to protect the Somali unity and Somali peace. The active role being taken by Abiy Ahmed and the Ethiopian federal government to mediate an internal Somali issue, an internal Somali conflict, yet again demonstrates the failures of this administration.